Hello, everyone. Glad you're all here and tuned into our webinar. Um, right before we start, let's briefly discuss the goals of today's webinar. On one hand, we want to talk with our expert Mona, who will introduce herself shortly, and Ferdi about the challenges in the sustainability context when you receive inquiries. And on the other hand, we want to demonstrate the added value that artificial intelligence can have in this workday. The whole thing, of course, a bit hands-on, based on Mona's user story. And at the end of the webinar, if you stay long enough, everyone will also get a surprise from us. And yes, I would say let's start and not waste any time. Mona, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, very gladly. Thank you very much. Exactly, I am Mona Klockner. I have been with Jungheinrich since 2022 and am in the sustainability department in the governance team. We deal a lot with, let's say, non-financial reporting, non-financial KPIs. Exactly. And I am responsible or co-responsible for the preparation of the non-financial report, or now it's called the sustainability statement according to ESRS, and I'm also responsible for ESG ratings. Our focus ratings include EcoVadis and CDP, for example, but we also participate in other smaller ratings.
Super, thanks, Mona. Good to have you here. First of all, again, from our side, Ferdi, would you like to continue?
Yes, very gladly. Thank you very much. Also, a warm hello to everyone from my side here in sunny Berlin. Yes, I am Ferdinand Heck, or simply Ferdi. We, or the team now, turnus.ai, with me practically in the product responsibility. We have developed Turnus over the past year for over 8 months. And we are also very proud to be able to present this repeatedly. Together with, among others, Mona, we repeatedly have various test users who cover and apply very different scenarios with our tool. And of course, we are also pleased to be able to present this again now. And conversely, we would also be happy to answer questions about the tool, but perhaps also about the journey of Turnus AI.
Very well, thank you. Exactly to me. About myself, Maximilian Ball. I am also responsible for business development at turnus.ai. And today I will give a little bit of moderate the whole thing, and I'm just happy. And I'm curious about your questions at the end of the webinar, just as Ferdi has already said. But before we dive into the short discussion about the challenges, we want to ask you one more question. And I believe you must exactly, please cast your vote and submit it.
Wonderful, we already have 10 responses. I will now close 11 responses once and then show the details. You should all be able to see it now. Exactly, we are currently fluctuating between 3.2 and 3.3 stars. So most of those in this call or webinar have at least some overlap with AI in their daily work intersections and use it more often here and there as an application. Very nice, wonderful. Then this is the perfect starting point to dive into the topics.
Exactly. Beyond that, you might learn one thing or another today from Ferdi. Exactly, but let's first talk about the challenges, Mona. Exactly. What are some typical challenges you encounter in your daily work at Jungheinrich when you think about these sustainability requests?
Yes, well, first I would say that basically we or the customer inquiries related to sustainability are forwarded directly to us internally. So those that are not answered in the customer inquiry process born can be forwarded to us, and those are, I would say, relatively many individual questions that you then receive, which are mostly quite specific. That, of course, takes time to answer. On the other hand, we also have internal requests, internal inquiries that are not customer inquiries, because sustainability is basically anchored throughout the company. It's not just, I would say, the environmental issue, but we have topics in different areas in the field of human resources include a lot of sustainability topics, but sustainability is also really found throughout the entire company. That means we have both external and internal inquiries. And a big topic that also concerns me, because I am responsible for the ESG ratings, are the inquiries about ratings and rankings. So it's actually the case that for most, or let's say, especially for the big ratings questions, it is also mostly the larger customers who actually ask us to respond to these ratings. And yes, I think it is usually also the case that actually then who evaluate their supply chain accordingly based on these ratings. That means these inquiries are already relatively important as well. And the ratings are very extensive. Especially the big ratings, CDP and EcoVadis, have more like, I would say, enormous questionnaires with really hundreds of questions that need to be answered really throughout the entire organization on all kinds of topics. EcoVadis, for example, labor and human rights, sustainable procurement, ethics, and of course also the environment. And CDP, for example, has many emissions questions. It's indeed more about the environment, but very detailed. And yes, that indeed costs the companies a lot of resources to answer these ratings. So sometimes it really takes several months until such a rating is fully answered.
Yes, mentioned as an additional example, or other departments that are also involved, so to speak. Who else at Jungheinrich is it who then receives the requests, especially from the customers?
Well, fundamentally, I would say in the area of environment, there are all kinds of areas. So basically, environmental issues are largely, of course, within our department. But I also think, especially in purchasing and sustainable procurement, there's a lot to do in the HR area, as I would say. Social is also a major, I would say, area when you look at ESG. And then we also have topics like data protection, customer security. That all counts as sustainability topics too. And exactly, it is often, I would say, a bit harder to grasp than these classic environmental topics, emissions, exactly, circular economy or similar.
And I would say, if in sales, so to speak, the inquiries, the customers then land, how long would you estimate if the sales department cannot answer? Does it typically take for feedback, because it has to go through the whole organization, so to speak, until it gets back to the customer? So is it perhaps also a bit...
If possible, it's naturally the case that we do have a very good inquiry process, of course. If everything, let's say, goes according to plan, then hopefully the questions end up with us relatively quickly if the responsibilities are properly defined. But it can also often happen, it's also often the case that somehow the emails are forwarded through several hands, end up 3 times with the wrong person, and then eventually reach the right department. And that is, of course, also that can, of course, happen too. So it's always a bit of a question how abstract the question is, whether you can assign it directly. But with sustainability issues, let's say, not everything is always perfectly defined. So it can also happen that the inquiry ends up in the wrong place. Yes.
And if we look back at EcoVadis, or generally at the topic of ratings and rankings, you already mentioned that it takes an incredible amount of time and requires a lot of resources, also cross-departmental. How is collaboration handled when, so to speak, a rating is due?
Essentially, there are specific contacts for specific topics. So those, we've defined them for ourselves, so to speak, but they still have to gather information from other contacts in part. So those are, and often, yes, because there's such a massive information, it obviously takes up quite a bit of capacity from the respective, I'll call them topic managers for now. That's what we call the responsible parties, both for the ratings and in the sustainability report, those who are in charge of the topic within the company, so to speak. A lot of capacity is, of course, taken up to address the topics, because in the end, I am the person who collects everything, but the capacity often lies with the individuals responsible for the respective topic, who then have to answer the question or have to inquire further within the company again. So basically, it's a relatively large apparatus, especially because of the sheer number of questions that need to be answered there.
Now you can see from your background, first of all, congratulations again for the Platinum EcoVadis certificate to Jung Heinrich. As an example with EcoVadis, if I have to imagine that when so many people from the organization are involved, and yes, the EcoVadis questionnaire, it comes with a mass of questions. Are the questions then, so to speak, not every year is the same in the EcoVadis questionnaire? Couldn't I just say, if I got a platinum status last year, 2023, couldn't I just say copy paste 2024? Here are the answers. And then platinum is secured again. How does that work? How should I imagine that?
Well, basically, it's like, it's obviously a good foundation. If you had a platinum last year, you definitely have to say that. A lot of work has already gone into it. Usually it's, let's say, a development. That one creates a foundation at the beginning, so to speak, and then works up to a certain result, so to speak. But it is also the case that new questions arise every year. They must be analyzed first. And basically at EcoVadis, it's I think the top 1% of companies receive the platinum status, and that fluctuates, of course. So the score needed for the platinum status varies. It always changes. So it always depends on how many companies are among the top 1%. That means we actually have to check every year if we're still in the range with our score where we can get platinum. And if we do not, so to speak, answer the new questions satisfactorily, then that you then slip down with the score and lose the platinum status. So we have heard from some companies this year that they actually lost their platinum status. So simply put, having a guarantee to get the platinum status again is definitely not the case.
So you really have to roll up your sleeves and get back to work. How is it from the customer's perspective, so to speak? Do you think it's important for customers that a company has such a certification? What is your assessment?
I do think it is important. I have generally also heard more often that there's often a kind of traffic light system. That means that that customers, let's say, demand that a certain result is achieved. So that then, for example, it is demanded that, let's say, at least gold, for example, is achieved with the customers below, so to speak. It is just easier for companies or, let's say, customers to track their supply chain if they use such ratings, because a lot of information is requested which would otherwise have to be obtained individually from companies. This means you can already track your supply chain a little with such a rating and query certain areas. So it naturally also depends on what is particularly important for the company. But I think I would say that is, especially with EcoVadis, it is very broadly covered, since all topics are actually included with labor human rights, ethics, sustainable procurement, and environmental concerns. So it is very broad. I think that's the customers. So I believe it is a very popular rating where customers and see what the current status is. And I believe it has already been the case that customers do not want to work with companies that do not complete EcoVadis. And I think it is already a very important rating for many customers, yes.
Which is very good for the environment, is that our customers also consider it relevant in this case. Exactly, then maybe a technical question. How should I imagine such an EcoVadis questionnaire is filled out? Do I also need to substantiate my answers provided? or how does that technically work, so to speak?
Exactly. So Equatus is, I believe, almost one of the only ratings where you actually have to justify every answer. So you respond to a question with a document in which you essentially demonstrate that this question or this measure or similar is fulfilled, or that you have set a goal that really has to be substantiated every time. Right, you can use all sorts of internal documents for that. Right, we also use the annual report for many things because it already contains a lot, like the sustainability report within the annual report, let's put it that way. Right, but in principle, every question must be documented.
Because it's a bit omnipresent and on everyone's lips. We also want to briefly touch on the topic of the EU Omnibus proposal, which was published last week on Wednesday, and perhaps get your expert assessment. Will the relevance of ratings or rankings increase from your perspective due to this proposal?
I think fundamentally yes, because now fewer companies are, in principle, have to meet the new disclosure requirements according to CSID or ESRS. That means I think more companies or multiple companies, customers in this case, their supply chain, continue to track through ratings. A harmonization of reporting would have potentially led to the ratings would have been pushed a bit into the background because more information could have been obtained from a, let's say, harmonized sustainability report. Since now fewer companies are obligated to do this, only companies with more than 1,000 employees, or at least that's the plan for now. Fundamentally, the whole thing is not yet established, really converted, and also not yet implemented into German law. But if it is going to come like that, then is this especially for smaller companies, which will then, I think, continue to answer questions more through ratings or customer inquiries? Yes.
That means I would say the smaller suppliers will continue to be flooded with requests.
I would say the same.
That will be a lot of manual work again. Okay. Let's wrap things up a bit. First of all, thank you for your assessment and insights on the EcoVadis questionnaire and the scope behind it. I think it's a lot of work that outsiders can't really grasp. So thank you very much. And then I would like to move on to the next chapter, so to speak. Specifically, we also want to look at a case study on how to use this flood of requests with artificial intelligence. And exactly, Fadi, Mona, the stage is yours.
Exactly, Mona, you will probably share your screen briefly in a moment. I'll start the introduction for now. As a transition, you already brought a few questions with you. Exactly, what purpose or goal does turnus.ai serve in the first step? And that is exactly what Mona and Maximilian have just discussed for a while. Answering these various types of inquiries in any format and on many different topics is what turnus.ai aims to simplify using artificial intelligence and indeed also enable the entire automation behind it. Mona, I'll turn it back over to you. Please guide us a bit through your use case. You have used the tool quite a lot in the past. Feel free to walk us through it openly and show once again how simple and intuitive the tool is so that everyone can quickly get started and find their way around immediately.
Exactly, gladly. So basically, I have to say EcoVadis is an example here. You can certainly use it for other inquiries, but I'd like to briefly show it once through EcoVadis, or rather my approach for EcoVadis. Basically, can I briefly show this? I often proceed this way with Coupadis. Of course, you can do this with all other questionnaires that I once in Excel, the whole thing. Yes, I would say build up, and then you can, I would say, see, for example, which questions were rejected and then filter accordingly. I also have, let's say, additional information in the back, which let's say look at the questions again and what we might have already done there. And also always consider whether there is a need for action this year or not. But basically, one could now, let's say, simply filter by those that were rejected. And then you can generally see which questions need to be answered for the year. Right. And then you could basically also create an Excel file, which you could use as a tool, for example, to directly answer questions. I'll just jump into the tool. First of all, I'd like to show the database. So for me, there are already several documents in here. Basically, it's super easy to handle. So I'll just go ahead now. For example, you can easily drop a document here by dragging and dropping it. You can simply drag it to the right side, and then it appears in the database. And the documents are also used to answer the questions. So the handling is really super easy, and then you can really just see which documents I need for my inquiries. If, let's say, you want to answer customer inquiries, then maybe only external or documents that can be used externally. So you can filter a bit what information you release, for example. Exactly. Since EcoVadis has good data protection, I would say you can enter all kinds of information that is internal. Therefore, you basically have all possibilities here. Exactly, I just showed the Excel. Basically, you can now, if you simplify it a bit, make some kind of create a mini Excel where you have different tabs for the individual requests that, for example, are still open, where the document was rejected, where we haven't received a response yet, or that might also be new. But you could also pack simple customer inquiries that you receive, questionnaires sent by customers, into such an Excel. Exactly. And then I will show this once when you go to upload request. Then can I also just drag and drop the Excel file in here?
Exactly, for the moment, perhaps I'll just jump in here. What happens now? These questions, yes, this catalog of questions in this Excel structure needs to be interpreted and read out first. In the background, we also have an LLM, that is an AI running. A language model that reads this unstructured format and extracts only questions from all this data. And this is still important. I mean, Mona, your application example was very nice and simple. The questions were deliberately taken from the EcoVadis questionnaire. You know, those are questions. There are also other examples of applications. For instance, you might have information around it in Excel or have various subcategories. And that, of course, must also be correctly read out. And for that, we have an AI running in the background, which is called LLM as a judge, essentially questioning again whether this question is read correctly. Is it a question, and should I include it here again? Back to you, Mona.
Yes, thank you. Exactly. Now you can see the questions here under the individual tabs here, environmental, then social, A, and governance, exactly, under ESG. And now I can basically check if the questions have been correctly adopted. And if I click here, I can also basically change something about the questions. But it looks to me now as if the questions have been well transferred. Therefore, I can leave it like that for now. And exactly, if you believe the inquiries are correct so far, then I would click on generate answers.
Exactly. I'll briefly explain what's happening in the background. I think this is the most exciting moment now. Mona has already shown the database. The database can be of any size. And what happens now? The artificial intelligence goes through this entire data set step by step for each question and tries to find an answer. But it not only tries to find a simple answer, but simultaneously tries to establish a so-called confidence level. This means finding a certain intersection of answers in several documents, and through this, the quality of the answer can be provided or increased. This will take a little moment to start. In the background, these are various so-called API calls. That means we first have to let all the servers communicate with each other. We need to access the database and also the model. Here we are using Claude 3.5 from Anthropic. Via an API. This is also important to highlight. At this point, we are data protection compliant in this form, meaning no data used in this system, in this construct, goes outside and vice versa. The questions we have entered now cannot go outside either. At the moment, in the background, it is running up, right? We are now gradually at 12, and it will now run a bit faster, 12, 35%, and so on, up to 100%. What's important is that the whole system is becoming more intelligent. So with every correctly answered questionnaire that is stored and uploaded, the quality, the response quality can of course be increased. And as a result, our answers in the structure will progressively become better. And now within, well, 1 minute and 30 seconds, I would estimate we were able to completely answer 26 questions. Mona, you can best answer it with very good quality in my understanding. So also what one desires in terms of answer quality, but I would also give it back to you now so you can go through it again.
Yes, great. Thank you very much. Exactly. So we had the quality in general of the answered questions. That's actually really very good. Based on the databases you provide, I would say, but if you have a good databases, then the quality is really very, very good. Very good. If you now have, for example, a large business report in the company, like we do, with a large sustainability section, for example, then it can already help to input the sustainability report into the database, and you usually get a lot of questions answered. You can see here that the sustainability report I had uploaded several years, so from 2019 to 2023, is often used as a basis here. And what I find particularly exciting, both for EcoVadis and, let's say, when you actually receive individual customer inquiries as well, that you can jump directly into the document here, and then you immediately see the page where the information is located. And then you can basically check again whether the information is correct or whether it is what you meant. And for EcoVadis, this is, I would say, a special advantage bonus because you have to upload evidence for every response. That means you also have to provide a page number. So basically that is already the answer you need for EcoVadis, for example. So you have the sustainability report from the year 2022, page 9, which you can then provide, for example. Exactly. If you only want answers from the sustainability report of 2023, for example, then you can also only provide those who give the databases. It is often required, I would say, to always use the latest document. You have complete control over that. But yes, that way you can always precisely check what information is in the document and where you can find it and verify it again. Exactly. I find that particularly interesting because I believe many people in the company generally don't know the sustainability report that well. There is a lot of information in it, but if you're not very familiar with it, let's say, then you search for a relatively long time for information because you don't know the exact wording. You can't search the document directly so easily, and through such a function, I would say you get an answer relatively quickly. And this is especially, of course, also for customer inquiries, great because you can answer them super quickly without, it is in principle already a formulation included. In principle, you could just copy and paste here and send it out. If, for example, you have only entered information into the database that is usable externally, so to speak, then you only have to check it once and you could already send it out.
Perhaps as a final step, Mona, I mean, I know that for you with EcoVadis is not always the most important step, but just to show that we have done it once. So when we're sure all answers are given, and by the way, I mean, this worked very well. We answered all questions correctly right away. But if that's not the case, the answer fields will be highlighted in orange or even in red, for example. The purpose of this is that you can see it a little bit here. The AI in the background is not 100% sure if this answer is really correct. It is highlighted in orange. You should read through it once. You can also click into this field at any time and edit it again. Parallel to this, you can see it on the right of this speech bubble. Mona, could you click on it once more? You can send it to colleagues who also work in this system. They will then receive the link and can open it in their browser, scrolling down to this exact question where perhaps a review should take place. And exactly, Mona, if you go out there one more time in the last step, as mentioned, it's not the use case for you right now, but often it's the case that in other scenarios when requests come from suppliers or even other people, the last step up here would be to complete it as done. And then combine this pre-generated questionnaire you received with the answers. In our case, we have now done that for the first time, relatively, let's say, solved in a basic way. Everything is compiled together into a PDF so that I can immediately send it back via email to the requester, for example. In the future, we want to manage to write this into the entry Excel as well. So that everything is sent back in a meaningful format and the requester can use it immediately and store it in their system. And yes, maybe Mona, you could go into the history once again or complete the process here now. Right, also on complete process. Then you return to the main view, and in the history, which might be interesting to show, again, we now have all the questionnaires that we have ever uploaded. In the future, if you work with a team in an instance, you would see who uploaded it, when it was uploaded, and also the other way around, who edited it and whether it is already finished. So with the green check mark, it means that the process is completed. That is, all answers are correct. Were answered, and then the PDF was also generated in the last step. And Mona, maybe as a use case for you, I mean, you have already used it a few times, I believe. Our additional feature, which we also have on board, maybe you would like to quickly talk about it.
Exactly. So that would be the AI assistant here. It's, let's say, a kind of, I hope I'm not saying it wrong, but a kind of chatbot that you work with. Exactly. Yes, I also find it particularly interesting when you receive individual inquiries, then you don't have to exactly upload a complete questionnaire somehow, or even right now, let's say, if you receive new requests in ratings, or let's say filter, okay, there are 10 to 20 new questions or something. And from that, if I need to answer 3 more, I can simply ask them individually here, so to speak. I've actually copied a question from EcoVadis. If I now see something like rejected or not answered, then I could just simply ask them here once. This is about qualitative and quantitative goals in the area of energy and emissions.
Perhaps as a comparison, Mona, I mean, the question is quite complex and has various levels, I would say. If you were to normally try to answer it manually and somehow gather this information, or at all, so maybe you can lead us through the process, how would you proceed to generate an answer, and perhaps also give an idea of how long it might take you?
Well, basically for this information, because now let me say it's very striking, is basically not very long, because I am very familiar with the sustainability report and the information is also included there. But I would say that if you actually have a new question like that, and which you then based on, it can also be that it is not included in the sustainability report, for example, then I would have to also first in the company, also I would have to look for a document, but then I would first have to find the information in it. Often it is actually quite a lot of work for colleagues, also to, let's say, searching or explaining. And in principle, you could also just work with documents here. That means I could get a document and then just search the document or inquire, and then derive the answer from it. But in principle, you would first have to see what exactly is being sought, and then probably several documents need to be examined for, search through the information, if it's not necessarily the annual report, let's say. But if, for example, a person who doesn't know the annual report as well as I do receives the request, then it is, of course, an effort, because you first have to familiarize yourself with the document, find the section exactly. Yes, now one can see here, in principle, this was really quite well answered based on our annual report. These are our goals, including the quantitative goals according to SBTI. Exactly.
The sources, this is perhaps also important to emphasize again, are of course extremely relevant for us in this context. From a technical perspective, the entire system is set up so that that the AI cannot hallucinate, meaning it does not invent any topics. And especially when you ask such questions, you naturally want to be 100% certain that the answers are not somehow invented and do not come from the internet, but truly that the answer is generated only from my own. Isam and Mona, you can probably judge it best. You are well versed in the sustainability report. Especially when you look at the sources, then ideally these sources of information are reproduced here, written into the text. And what is also very nice in this application case is when one directly interacts in this chat interface. One could theoretically have it rewritten, or I could now also say, please translate Portuguese or Spanish. You can explore these use cases here. You can interact with the data. And I think it's very nice and easy to expand the use cases. As you correctly said, Mona, just throw another file in there, and then you can ask specific questions if it's somehow 150 pages and I don't quite understand where everything is. Also in some tables that are somehow complexly combined, then you can interact very nicely with these files here and have the answers repeatedly output, iteratively modify them in terms of wording and tweak them, just so that you also somehow get a nice answer together.
Exactly.
Looking at the time, we are actually almost done with the demo for now at this point. Mona, thank you for showing once again how you use the tool. I always think it's great. I am always happy to get feedback from you somehow. You do a lot of testing, which is good. That's how it's supposed to be. We also have to say that we are still deep in development in some parts. Is that then the best we can get, namely user feedback in that form and also suggestions on how the whole thing can be improved. Yeah, and that is actually the point where we would open the question room.